Hello, are we live? Okay, if we are live, if you can see me, if you can hear me, then send me a thumbs up or a hello, and I know I'm actually talking to somebody. Okay. Do we have anything? Okay. All right. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk a bit about the many books that I've made over the past 18 to 20 years, these enormous XXL archives books for Taschen. So I'm going to go through Ingmar Bergman, Pedro Almodovar, James Bond, Charlie Chaplin, and the 2 Star Wars books, and I'm going to explain really how they came about and how they're made. Okay, so let's get started. Let's get going with the first book, Ingmar Bergman. Okay, so Ingmar Bergman, the book comes with a strip from Bergman's Fanny and Alexander that's gone through his projector, and a DVD with almost 2 hours of previously unseen documentary material and some of Bergman's home movies, only available with the book. So how did the book come about? Well, it started with a PR person in Taschen knowing somebody in Sweden who knew Ingmar Bergman, and they said, well, this friend said, well, Ingmar is on his island, Fora, near Gotland, and he's not feeling appreciated. So I said to Benedict Taschen, look, it'd be great if we could do a book on Ingmar Bergman. Benedict says, yeah, go ahead, get in touch. So I was making these books about so big, 192 page visual biographies of famous filmmakers, and I sent a box to Ingmar on his island in Fora. Now, Ingmar had, the way I hear it, the story I was told, is that Ingmar got the box, he opened it up, and he took out the book on Hitchcock, the book on Antonioni, the book on Fellini, the book on Billy Wilder, on Truffaut, and he goes, where the bleep is the book on me? And then he saw my letter, and basically he said yes, we could do a book on him. Then around the same time, Jeppe Wikström from Maxström, a Swedish publisher making lots of art books and photo books, got in contact with Taschen, with me, and said, oh, he'd like to do a book on Ingmar Bergman as well. So wouldn't it be great if we collaborated? So I went to Stockholm to meet Jeppe, and the first thing he did was he introduced me to Bengt Vanselius. Now Bengt is an absolutely amazing photographer, and not only that, one of Sweden's great photographers, great reporters as well, and also he happened to be Ingmar's official photographer. He photographed many of Ingmar's later movies, and so I went to Stockholm, met Bengt, and Bengt basically took me to Dramaten, which is where Ingmar had done all these great plays, and they had archives. He took me to Svenska Television, where Ingmar had done 50 or more television and radio plays, and they had archives. He took me to Svenska Film Industry, out in the country, and they where Bergman had made all of these great movies, like here, Seventh Seal, amazing movies, and Wild Strawberries, etc. And they had archives. And then he took me to the Ingmar Bergman Foundation, which is where Bergman kept all of his documents, all of his scripts, everything that he owned, everything to do with his movies. it was just extraordinary. All of this was there, and I said to Benedict, look, we need to do a really, really big XXL book, and that's what we did. He agreed. Ingmar basically said he didn't want to meet with us, but he did want to, because he didn't want to have any influence on the book, on what we wrote or included, but what he wanted to but he said that we could use everything he'd ever written, and as a consequence of that, he told all his friends, and basically all the archives opened up and they allowed us to use everything and anything that we wanted. It was like the whole country of Sweden was open to us. So it was obvious that Bengt and I had to make the book together. So what we did is Bengt dealt with the research for all the images, I dealt with the research for all the text, I selected all the texts that are in the book, with quotes, and edited all those together. I worked with people like Peter Cowie, Birgitte Stina, Bengt Forsland, people who were experts on Bergman, and they wrote some of the text between the book in order to, as you like, to be the glue that joined all of Bergman's text together. So, absolutely amazing experience. And one of the things that happened, so as I said, Bergman did not want to influence us in any way, but Erland Josephson, his best friend, they would ring every Saturday morning and they would exchange gossip. And Erland told us that at the same time that we were going through all of these archives and looking at everything, that Ingmar was in his island on Fora, and he had taken all the scripts and photos that he had in his house, and he had arranged them all over the floor of his living room, and he had got on his chair and he'd stood on his chair and he was looking down on all his work as though he was surveying his life and his past at the same time that we were going through all the documents. And I thought that was a really sweet thing to share, and it showed that Ingmar was with us in spirit on this side. Sadly, Ingmar passed while we were making the book, and he never got to see the finished thing. And one of the things that happened is that Bengt was interviewed because of this, and the reporter, after the interview, Bengt was talking to the reporter, and the reporter said, you know, my dad used to be childhood friends with Ingmar, and they used to plan to make movies together. And one of the things that his father had still was this manuscript. This was a manuscript by Ingmar Bergman, photos by Rolf Agren, and this was their plan for a script for a movie. And so because of that, we managed to get hold of this and to include it. And these are photos of Bergman as the central character. The films never got made, but it just goes to show that even as a teenager, Bergman planned to make movies and loved them. And the other thing that happened was that, I've got to go through all of these books, so I can't tell you all the stories. But the other thing that happened is that we'd actually finished the book, we'd finished the layout, and Bengt was working on the scanning. So once the layout is approved and finished, we then do high-res scans of all the images to send to production, so that the files can be made up and sent to the printer. So Bengt was doing these high-res scans, and he rang me up and he said, Paul, you never guess what happened. I said, what happened? And it was very late at night and everybody else was asleep. And he said, I was scanning, right, and I saw at the back of a filing cabinet some stuff had fallen down, and he picked it out, and there were these colour rolls of film from Persona, which is one of Bergman's iconic movies, colour photos like this. And so they'd never been published. Bergman, like this, Bergman had made sure that many of the photographs from Persona were not released to the public. He just wanted a very specific set of photos. So we knew that these had never been published before, and immediately we had to change the layout and find places in order to replace other photos, to put these extraordinary photos in. So we put this and this, and also at the beginning. And the reason why they're so important is because they also, not only did they show the production of the movie, but they also showed the birth of the relationship between Ingmar Bergman and Liv Ullmann, which lasted for many years. So this is both the professional relationship and personal relationship. So sometimes, no matter how much research you do, no matter how much you plan, there's always something that happens in order to change what you think you're going to do, and you have to react to it, you have to include it. And that's part of making these books, is that you have to be free and open to everything that's happening around you. Okay, so that's Ingmar. Do we have any questions? Oh, my computer. All right. Okay. Do we have? So thanks, David. Thanks. Happy that you liked Star Wars Archives. Definitely fun to make. I'll come to that at the end. Whole process, inception, presenting the project to the publisher. Actually, for all of these books and for all of the books that I've made with Taschen, the best way that I found to present to Benedict is to show him images. He often, if you know that it's James Bond, he knows what James Bond is. He knows what Charlie Chaplin. Everybody knows who they are. But what he wants to see is that there are enough great photos in order to justify the money, the expense, the time, in order to make these enormous books. And really that's it. So I will have up to 50 photos, just absolutely fantastic photos, as many as unpublished as possible, and that's what I will send to Benedict. Okay, all right, so let me move on to Pedro. As I switch over, maybe there's adverts or stuff that come on, I don't know. Let's find out, but I'll be back in a minute. So, Pedro Almodovar. So, how this came about was quite unusual, very unusual for Taschen. Taschen ran, because I was doing so many film director books and little movie icons, little photo books on various stars, Taschen ran a poll, basically asking, which director would you like us to do a big book on? And Pedro Almodovar was number one. He was the most popular in the poll. And I'd already started work on a small book on Pedro, but as soon as we had this poll, Benedict said, let's contact Pedro, see if he's interested, and let's make a big book, because that's what people who read Taschen want to read. So off I went to Madrid. I met Pedro and his brother Agustin, and they were delighted. They said, yeah, great, we love it, let's do it. So off we went, and so this is a matter of us going through. So I was at that time working on Ingmar Bergman. Pedro adores Ingmar Bergman. I would even bring him, like, there's a little pen from the Ingmar Bergman Foundation with a little thing drawn, a little devil drawn by Ingmar, and I would come and I'd give it to Pedro, and it was great. And it's interesting that if you have a look at, like, this image here from Broken Embraces, which he was filming at the time that I was making this book, this idea of these images that are all spread out and torn up, etc. This is very similar to some images that Ingmar had used. And if you have a look at Talk to Her as well, if I can find the image, I'll get there in a minute. Coming up, coming up, coming up. Or not. Okay, so on Talk to Her, it's very similar the way it was set up, with the imagery with the two faces, one on the side and one to the front, which is exactly like Persona. So the whole idea of me going to Madrid was great. The way it was set up at the archive was that all the photographs, all the photography was in the basement. So I basically would arrive in the morning, go down into the basement and spend all day in the basement just looking at all of these photographs and selecting photographs, and the ones that I thought were most appropriate for the to include in the book. Now, what I do when I'm making the book, what I want to select are images that you will know from the movie. There are certain iconic moments that when they're filming the movie, they don't necessarily know that they're going to resonate with an audience, but I've already seen the movie. I can go through and I can select those images which really capture the movie, and then I want to find images that capture the making of the movie and how it was done. So as I'm going through, that's what I'm selecting, and also I'm telling the story of the movie in the layout. So it's normally in plot order. And again, we've got this big wall full of images, very much like Ingmar Bergman would do. All the influences and Pedro directing. He loves to direct. So that's in the selection. But I was there day in, day out, day in, day out, to such an extent that I would just spend all day down there. I wouldn't even come up for lunch. I would just go down. And I came up one morning, one evening afterwards, about 5 or 6 o'clock. The place was empty. Not only was it empty, it was locked. The lights were off, and they'd forgotten about me. So I actually had to ring up somebody in order to find somebody who lived local to Pedro's office, so that they could come and unlock the door so to let me out. Luckily that happened, otherwise I would have spent all night in the archive. Anyway, I would have been okay because they had absolutely lovely food on the second level. So, but yeah, so these sort of things happen all the time. Alright, so for Pedro, like Ingmar, the problem I had was that it's in a foreign language. So it's in Spanish, I don't know Spanish. Ingmar was in Swedish, I don't know Swedish. So how do I find texts in order to fill the book? I've got the images, but where do I find the texts? And so this is a problem. How do I solve it? Thinking. And then I realised that I'd actually bought some of Pedro's press kits that he'd released. Beautiful press kits that had been released when he'd premiered his films at Cannes Film Festival. And I was reading through it, and these are in multiple languages, but also they're all written by Pedro. So I said to Pedro, these essays are great because he writes about the influences for the movies, about other movies that he loves, about the actors and people involved, and really sometimes about himself and what his feelings are and what he's feeling about and thinking about at that time. I thought, that's great. Pedro, this is great. You've got it for Talk to Her, you've got it for Voltaire. Do you have it for other movies? Oh yeah, I've done lots of these. Great. Can I use them in the book? Yeah, sure, no problem. And do you have it for all your movies, like going back? Did you write them? And he says, oh yeah, I wrote tons of stuff for everything. Do you have copies of them? No, I don't. I don't have copies. So what it became is that once that idea was there, and we knew that was how to solve the issue with the text, I spent the next year going on eBay and Spanish sites and book sites, etc., looking for newspapers, magazines, fanzines. There were a lot of fanzines in the 1980s, and Pedro would write for lots of them. And also there were film magazines as well. Some of them no longer published, etc. So that became so this is the poster for Talk to Her, and it's in the same sort of format as Persona. And so that became the way that we got the text done. That became the way of solving that. And what happened was that Pedro, I would send the text to Pedro, he would say, okay, include it, no problem. But there were other times where he didn't want to include them, that he didn't think it was well written, so that was gone. And then there were other times where he disagreed with what was written. And I was saying, well, Pedro, that was you in 1986 or 1984. That was the Pedro then of 1984. But what does the Pedro now think? And wouldn't it be great if we contrasted those? And why don't you write about what you think now? So this is what happened, is that the whole book became a sort of dialogue of Pedro looking at his life in the past and what he thought then, and then writing new material for the book to explain what he thought now and how he felt. That was great. I mean, the book really should be, it's really written by Pedro Almodovar, and it should be presented as this. So we finished the book, and Pedro and Augustine loved it. They call it the Bible now, and I opened this and I just realised that this is the copy that Pedro gave to me, which is really nice. Dear Paul, now that I can touch it, I am so happy with it. Thanks a lot, Pedro. So that was lovely. It was a wonderful experience. The thing I want to just mention is that we were working on. He was working on Broken Embraces while he was filming it, while we were making the movie, and I was lucky enough to go on set. Doesn't always happen when you're making the books, but so Pedro invited me on set. I met Penelope Cruz and everybody else, and it was a lovely, very, very sweet and lovely crew. Very small. They had worked with each other for many, many years. He keeps the same people with him all the time. They know each other. It was great. So I spent the day visiting, travelling to the film studio. They were doing nights because they'd been filming nights in Madrid, and so I went one night, and then so they wanted to carry that on. So filming nights in the studio, and they were filming this scene here, where Penelope Cruz plays a character who's essentially trapped in this relationship. And Pedro, he took me into the room. It's got a giant mirror on one side, and then the three other sides are all the decor. So you could only film from one very specific point, and you just had one camera. And Pedro took me inside, and he showed me the whole decor. And for Pedro, where it is, and every object, every colour, everything that you see on the screen has meaning. So the colour of the room and the design of the room used textures that Pedro had seen in prisons, and colours that Pedro had seen in prisons. So that's why there's this horrible sort of dank green. There's a painting, which is a painting of a slave market, obviously indicating that Penelope is a slave in this relationship, and even the objects that she wears, the jewellery, they're like chains. They look like a web. This was all completely designed by Pedro and his team, and he took me around the other set, and it was the same for each of them. So that was great. So they started filming this scene. I think this was first night or second night that they were there. Now, it's not often that you see a film director at work. So Pedro, he couldn't be in the room because, as I said, this giant mirror. So what Pedro did is he was outside. He would give Penelope and the other actors and the crew a little bit of direction. He comes out, sits down, puts on headphones, and he's looking at what's being filmed. Take one. Gets up, goes in, la la la, talks, comes out, back, take, no. Gets up, goes back, boom, boom. And he's doing this, and he's going back, and he's going faster and faster. Now, while I'm watching this, and around me are all the costume, makeup, decor, all the people who are normally around Pedro. They're all on their phones, and they're sending messages back and forth. They're sending images back and forth for continuity, so that they know what makeup, etc. is all doing. And they're chatting away very quietly, but chatting away. As Pedro is directing and going back and forth, suddenly it becomes quiet, because people know things aren't. Everybody knows, everybody senses that things aren't going the way that Pedro wants, that there's something missing, and he's not getting what he wants. So people are quiet. They're paying attention. They're there for him. And Pedro is going back, forth, faster and faster. He comes back, he sits down, and the continuity woman, who's been with him since the very first movie, she's there, and she puts her hand on Pedro's hand when he sits down. And it's a really sweet, quiet moment. But what she was saying is, don't worry, Pedro, take all the time you want. We're here for you. Don't worry. Right? And that was great. I thought that was so great. It was so great that the crew were there for him. They were so supportive of him. It's always difficult when filming. People don't realise you're filming. You want something that you want. You're in a new location. You have to start all over again, and you have to find the rhythm. You have to find the thing you're looking for when you're making the movie. And it was great that the team were there for him. Okay, so that's Pedro. Do we have any questions? Let's have a look. My computer is acting up. Nothing is coming up. All right, I have to log in. Can you tell me what the question is?
Matt Miraman asks, how did your approach to interviewing George Lucas change from the first Star Wars archives to the second?
Okay, well, I'll answer that when we get to Star Wars. But the conversation was not like that. It wasn't a Q&A in that way. But remember that. I will come back to that. Next up, after I take a sip, is James Bond. What time do we have? Are we live? We're live. Okay. So this is James Bond Archives. How this got started, each one of these books starts in a completely different way. It's funny. There's no template, there's no format. James Bond, when I first met Benedict Ash in 2001, he said to me, we discussed lots of different projects, what could we possibly do, and one of the projects was James Bond. Let's pick a James Bond. Yeah. Let's go for Gotham. Alright, so that was in 2001. 2010, Benedict, I have a meeting with Benedict. Benedict says, it's about time we did James Bond, isn't it? I said, yes, of course. So he said he would get in contact with Eon, with the producers, the James Bond movies, and we'd set up a meeting. 2 weeks later, I get a phone call from Jenny McMurray at Eon saying, oh, can we meet to discuss a book? I said, sure, Jenny, of course. Obviously expecting the call. So we go along to the Taschen offices in London, sit down, blah, blah, blah. And Jenny says, oh, we at Eon think that it'd be a great idea if we did a great big book on James Bond. Oh, so do we? When did Benedict get in touch? What? No, Benedict had not been in touch. Eon and Benedict had the idea at exactly the same time. And so, of course, since both of us wanted to make a book was made. And here it is. So, what then do I have to do to make a book on James Bond? Well, the first thing I have to do is to look through 1 million photos. So I'm looking at proof sheets, I'm looking at original negs, I'm looking at slides, I'm looking at vintage prints where some original negs are missing, and I'm looking at 1 million of them. Right? Now, I select between 5 and 10,000 out of that million. So that means about out of every 1,000 or 2,000 images that I see, I select one photo. So that gives you an idea of how specific I have to be in the photo selection. So that took about a year to make, in order to go through all of the photography. I then also had to have text, and Eon had done lots of interviews with all the people connected with the films, so I had transcripts of all of those. Physically, what that meant was that I had to take all of those transcripts and get them sub-edited so that they were in a readable form, because often transcripts, they have all the ums and ahs and little ellipses, etc. So they had to be cut down so that they were readable. The text then had to be cut up into film by film, because people often worked on multiple movies. And then for each movie you have pre-production, production, which is the actual filming, post-production, and miscellaneous. And so all of those quotes had to be sorted into these categories. All right. So I had all of this material, and I wrote the first few movies. I wrote about 6 or 8 of the movies, the text for these, so that into an oral history, taking all of these different voices, all of the people who worked on James Bond, into this format. The James Bond archives is brilliant, personified. Well, thank you very much, Brett. I appreciate it. Not to mention your Dr. No book. Okay, let's not mention the Dr. No book, but thank you very much. Yes. So in doing it that way, I had a template for how to do the book, and then I went into one of the warehouses that Eon owns, and they have lots and lots of scripts and production documents, and I was selecting all the materials for all the different movies. Then I would go with this text, this oral text, with this production documents, and I would ask all these different writers to write up these chapters. So I would give them a brief to show them. I would show them how I did it previously. They had that as an example, a template to follow. I would give them a brief of the things that I thought, that I'd already found, that I thought would be great to have in the book. And in this way, I could have all of these writers writing at the same time. Meanwhile, as they're doing that, because it's all about managing, having a sort of a line of work for everybody to for the whole thing to move forward as quickly as possible. So about every week or every 2 weeks, I would do a layout for the movie. As I said, I'd already written several of them. I'd do a layout, and then I would send them to Michael G. Wilson, Barbara Broccoli, and Eon for their comments. And I would get their comments back. Funny enough, I mean, they were making Skyfall at the time, and funny enough, they said, the problem that they had on From Russia with Love with the rats is exactly the problem we're having now on Skyfall. You know, so they found it funny that, you know, the problems are the same often in filmmaking. How do you get rats to act? You can't. And so they would come back with a few comments, a few changes, and then that's how we did it. That's how we did the approvals. So that every week or 2 weeks, I would send another layout, and this was the rolling aspect of the book. So this kept the book moving. Barbara and Michael weren't overwhelmed with the whole book, so that they could deal with the situation. And and that's how it worked. So that was great. In the end, the other issue I had was that I had to create a text for the latest movie, for Skyfall. So this was a new situation for me, because I hadn't experienced it before, certainly not like this. For Pedro Almodovar, Broken the Braces, he was writing that text, so he filmed it, then he wrote the texts afterwards so that we could then include it in the book. So that I didn't have to worry about that. So in this case, I knew that I had to write Skyfall. How am I going to write it? Well, I was given access to all the documents. I knew the plot twists. I was one of the few people who did know it. I had access to normally on a film that nowadays they will do EPKs, electronic press kits. So they will have somebody getting the actors when they're available, when they're not filming or not required on set. Maybe they've got half a day off. They will come in and they will interview them, and they'll do a whole group of them at the same time. I had access to those. I was at Pinewood looking through the photography. So as Francois Duhamel, as he was coming in, and he was the set photographer, lovely guy. He would come in, he would download all the photography, the raw files, onto a hard drive, and he would look through them and make his selections. But I'd be looking at everything as they were being downloaded. So I was in Pinewood, so it meant that I was available to interview the heads of departments. So this is director Sam Mendes, the producers, Barbara, Michael and Greg Wilson, cinematographer, production designer, art director, costumes, stunts, anybody, special effects, anybody who was on set or was the head of department. I was given access to them. So I would sit down and I would basically do an interview for a half hour or an hour, based on the material that I already knew had happened or was needed to be done. And it was great. I had complete access. So that's really how I could assemble. So I had access to the documents, I had access to the photos, and access to the people. I could assemble it in order to make the chapter. And so there you are. So the problem we had when you're doing a brand new movie and you've got it's very sensitive, the information. Obviously you don't want that information to leak. It's not good, and we have to earn the trust of the people that we work with. And with Eon, they obviously did not want the book, since we wanted to include all the plot spoilers in the book, they did not want the book released before until I think it was a month after the film was released. So but the book has to be printed beforehand. So we had to promise not to release the book, and also we had to make sure that things were locked up, that everything was secret, and was not going to be released. So to give an example, this was printed up. This has got everything up to Quantum of Solace, and then the last quattro, blank pages, so that we could show the book to everybody ahead of the movie coming out. But what was going to be in there Skyfall was secret. Because of course what happened was I remember actually when Francois, he came in after a shoot and he said, Paul, I've got this, you can't believe it, I got the absolute perfect photo. And what he'd done, he'd taken the death of Judi Dench, and he'd taken a photograph which had Judi Dench in Daniel Craig's arms, and then beside was Sam Mendes looking at them beside the camera, and all the crew looking down. It was like a Renaissance painting, like a Rembrandt. It was just, but Francois, he knew he had that photo, and so he told me, this is it, this is the photo. And of course I had to make sure I fought for that photo to be in the book, and it was great, and it was well worth it. And I think to this day this book is the only place it's ever been published. Anyway, so that gives you an idea of James Bond. Let's see if we've got any queries. No? Okay, let's move on. Next coming up is Charlie Chaplin. Let's work this. Okay, next, Charlie Chaplin. I adore Charlie Chaplin. I grew up watching Charlie Chaplin. My dad used to pretend he was Charlie Chaplin. He used to do, there were certain movements that Charlie Chaplin would do, and I remember in The Kid, he goes like this. My dad used to do that all the time. He used to watch Lauren Hardy, Buster Keaton, Harold Lloyd, Charlie Chaplin. Used to imitate them all. Brilliant. Charlie Chaplin, how did it come about? It came about because I did those little movie star books, the movie icons, did one on Charlie Chaplin, and I went to the archive, to the estate in Paris in order to research, in order to pick out photographs of in order to include in the book. 192 page book, great book, written by David Robinson. And as soon as I was there, I knew I had to do a book. I had to do a big book on Charlie Chaplin. I asked Kate, who ran the archive, the estate, can we do it? Jimbo, I rule. Lovely books. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Yes, I'm British. We don't react very well to people complimenting us. Okay, so Charlie Chaplin, Kate, I said, Kate, it would be great to do a great big book on Charlie Chaplin. And Kate said, yes, we'd love it. It'd be brilliant. We've got everything you need, and we own everything. We own the rights. It's very important that people that you contact actually own the rights to the materials that you want to include. Or if they don't own the rights, can get the rights for you. So I went back and I said to Benedict, actually this would have been about 2006, I think, and I said, Benedict, Charlie Chaplin, brilliant, we could do a big book, it'd be fantastic. And he went, like this. Okay. So I had other things to do. So I had Bergman to do and other things. So 6-7 years later, I get an email from Benedict. Benedict says, Paul, I had a dream about Charlie Chaplin last night. Let's do the Charlie Chaplin archives. I said, 2 thumbs up. Immediately, the second email I was to Kate. Kate, can we do a big book? Kate says, yeah, it's all clear. We can do it. and that day, contracts were being written. It was great. So what is? Oh yes, Lord of the Rings. I would love to make a Lord of the Rings book. Oh yes, Peter Jackson, if you're listening, please get in contact. See if I can persuade Taschen. If Taschen don't want to do it. Okay, so Charlie Chaplin. What is the problem with Charlie Chaplin? Okay, I'll tell you what the problem with Charlie Chaplin is. When you look at Ingmar Bergman and Pedro Almodovar, they are writers who use their life experiences and they put them in their movies. And they are also writers who write about their life experiences and they analyse themselves. So if you're looking for a text, right, the odds are they've written it somewhere or they've said it in an interview and you can find it. Right? And I didn't have that with Chaplin, because if you read Chaplin's autobiography, at no point does he tell you how he worked, how he did things. On the James Bond archives, they have all the documentation on every day, on every stunt, every gag that they did, who did it, etc., how it came about, and everybody talks about it. Chaplin, no. How he did his gags? He didn't want anybody to know how he did his gags because he always kept it secret. Because if he kept it secret, nobody could steal it from him. Because one of the problems that Chaplin had was that there were a lot of people using his persona, his look, and they were copying everything he did. So he wanted to keep everything secret. So I had a situation where I had access to everything, but the subject, he didn't tell you what his feelings were, and he didn't tell you how he did things. And I thought, well, I mean, I have photos. Even the photos, he would stop people taking photographs of some of his greatest moments, his greatest gags. So this was the issue. This was the problem that I had to solve in the book. But luckily, I found these. Right? Now these look like nothing, but what they are, the register of scenes. And what would happen is this, that the Chaplin's technique was to make up the movie as he went along. He was literally writing with film, because he would have an idea, he would set up the scenery, the scenario, etc. He would tell the different actors what to do, film it, right? And then he said, did anybody have any ideas, or they'd think about it, they'd go away, they'd have a drink, have a cup of tea, go for a swim, and then they'd come back and then they'd film again. So on here, Edna and Carl entering Carl's house. No good, 33, that means 33. Retake, no good, 23. Retake, okay, 27. Retake. Okay, so he must have got that shot, the shot that he wanted. And then it would be a long shot, and then it would continue in this way. Set up a new shot, film, set up a new shot, film. And then the purpose of this, right, and the reason it still exists, was that this was his, each one had a scene number, which is essentially the slate number, so that he used this as an editing guide. So he knew in the editing room that, do we have a photo of him in his editing room? I thought I did. No, somewhere else. But in his editing room, he would have all of these slates lined up, and he knew by looking at this register every single shot and every single slate that he had taken. That's why they still exist. And they exist for all his major movies. So this is for Gold Rush, where you can see the same. Long shot, fade in, interior cabin. No ashes on floor, rear door closed, door on left closed. A butcher knife on table, fire in his stove, sees Chaplin's cane under his cot, both beds made. Mac, who was the other character, sitting in bottom right of the table, moving from side to side, starving. CC, Charlie Chaplin, opens door on left, second hat on, snow on hat and shoulders and feet, right foot wrapped inside. He comes in, leans on door, leaves it open, goes up to the table, puts traps down on table. Mac looks up and says, anything? C says, not a thing, because the traps are empty. C walks back stage, puts gun down, left of door, comes forward, sits down left of table. Now, that gives you a complete description of what's going on. These are repeated. And the reason they're repeated is that often these shots, these scenes, would be assembled and then got rid of. And then assembled and got rid of. And in this way, by reading all this, I could find out how Chaplin actually made his movies. And also, so this is Fincher Analyst. I'm glad you're enjoying it. How much time, how many years it took to make each book, because they are so monumental, a million photos. Well, yes, they are monumental, and the time tends to be about the same amount of time. Ingmar Bergman was about 18 months, Pedro Almodovar about 18 months, 2 years to 2.5 years on Bond, Chaplin about 2 years, and it began back. It averages around about 2 years, sometimes 2.5 years. My work on it generally takes 18 months to 2 years. It depends on access, because sometimes if the archive or people involved in it are very busy working on other things, so on Star Wars, for example, Lucasfilm was so busy because they were starting up on the new movies that I couldn't start for a year. I literally had a year I had to wait before I could start going into the archives, because their schedule was completely full. But once I got in, it was great. It took me about 2 years. And then there's also approval processes. There are different people approving. This is why I like to start the approval process so early, so that by the time we've gone through and we get to the, where we're actually making the last chapter, that we can just go straight to approval for it, and that we don't have to wait too long. And also, when you do an approval process, people begin to understand the kind of book you're doing, and so on the first chapter they may go, I'm not too sure, but by the last chapter they know what the book is. And this is often half the battle when you're making a book, in that the people you're working with, they don't visualize it the way that I visualize it, and the only way that they can see it is to physically have it in their hands. And that was the same with Pedro on his book. Even though I explained it and I had the Ingmar Bergman book to show him, it's not the same when it comes to his own work. He doesn't see it the same way. So generally 2 years is really about it. It's a lot of work. Okay, so on Chaplin, I had access to the register of scenes, but I didn't have anything from Chaplin himself. Luckily, David Robinson, who did a magnificent biography on Chaplin, and Kevin Brownlow, who was just an amazing documentary filmmaker in his own right, had a lifetime's worth of research on Chaplin. They gave me access to all of their materials, which is enormous, and so I had that. But where do I get Chaplin's thoughts? Well, actually, it was funny. One of the things I had were press clippings, and I don't know Do we? Am I able to show any of those press clippings? No. Okay. There are some of them in the books. In the book, but essentially there were 150 enormous books of press clippings, and within those press clippings, covering Chaplin's entire life. I mean, it's phenomenal, very, very fragile. And I would open them up, and they were all layered, so it wouldn't be just one. It wouldn't be a page where you go 1, 2, 3, 4. It would be one clipping there and another on top of it, and then another on top and top. And sometimes the book would, on a single page, would be out like this, because there were like 10 or 20 layers of clippings, one over the other. Amazing. And I went through every single one of these on all 150 books. And what I found was this. Often Chaplin, when he would do an interview, right, he would be messing about, just having some fun. He would do an interview in the shower, he would do interview in the bath, he would do an interview hanging upside down. He would say, let's walk, and they'd walk through a city and do an interview. He would, he would make it fun for the people interviewing. A lot of the interviews were like that. They really contain nothing. They're what you'd call puff pieces. But then there were some interviews where he was in the middle of a film. He was writing, so he was thinking. And if he was with the right photographer, often there was some that he knew from his Carno days when he was travelling with Carno all around doing vaudeville, as it would be called in America, and he would go all around, and he met a lot of people, and he made friends with a lot of them, a lot of reporters. When he met somebody that he liked, and he was in this sort of reflective mood, he would talk about what was on his mind. So if in the case of modern times, he was thinking about mass production, he was thinking about the way that machines turned people, the workers, into machines, and he would. So if he was thinking about that and he was with the right person, then he would talk about it. The reporter would then include that in their report, and those were the really important interviews that I needed to find, and that's why I went through all 150 press books, because without those I wouldn't have been able to really make a book. The other thing was that if the reporter was from England, because Chaplin was British, from London, and he was living in America, and he often got homesick. And if somebody from England, from London, came across to his studio and visited his studio, right, he would give them complete access. And often these sort of reports were the ones that would include tales and anecdotes of Chaplin working and being on set. And those were the other interviews I was looking for in the press kit. So all in all, this was the thing. Within the register of scenes, they would give me clues to things that Chaplin tried but didn't use. And then I would look, and I would look at all the photographs, and I would see that some of the photographs, some bizarre photos. Let's see if I can find one. There is a very particular one. I need to find it. Here. Okay. So this photo's of Chaplin with a lot of dust on his ash, as it turns out, on his face. There's not a scene in the movie with that. What I found out was that looking through the register of scenes. Chaplin, this is him sitting on the stove here, and this is him with the feet in the stove. So Mac is very hungry, he could eat anything. He sees Chaplin as a chicken, a roast chicken, ready to eat. Yum yum. Chaplin realises that Mac thinks this, then goes to, in a scene that's been deleted, he then goes to the stove and he takes some of the ash and he puts it on him to make it look as though he's ill, to make it look as though he's infected. You know, that he's got the smallpox or whatever, typhus, whatever. And this way, not only would he be unappetizing to eat, but downright deadly, fatal. And so hence this swayed Mac from eating it. So that's what I was able to do, because I'd done the research and I was able to look at all of these materials. Okay, that's Chaplin. What's next? What's next? Any questions on Chaplin? Nope. Okay. What's next? Could it possibly be? Yes, it is. It's Star Wars. Alright. These are really heavy. Alright, are we on? We're on. Okay. Still live. Star Wars. Okay. Star Wars. Star Wars had been hovering around for a while as a book to do. And then Benedict did a contract with Walt Disney to make books on the Walt Disney movies, the animated movies. And so he had a contract and he had dealings with Disney. Disney then bought Lucasfilm, and then the idea came up, well, why don't we do Star Wars? Of course, let's do Star Wars. So literally it came from a contract. So in the other cases, all of them, if you like, came from me, or I had a hand in setting them up. In this case, Benedict said, Paul, you do Star Wars. I said, Benedict, I'm doing Star Wars. And okay, so how do you do a book on Star Wars? The contract said I was to do one book on all 6 Star Wars movies that had been made at the time. So they'd all been made by George Lucas, and I said, great. So I got access after a year, because we had because Lucasfilm were extremely busy at that time. Their schedule was full, their workload was full, and they needed to free up time and resources for me to actually go. So I go and I start researching. So as usual, it's just getting in the archive and taking sometimes the reference photos, notes, etc., and you go through everything. And everything. It's just incredible. They had multiple archives. So you have one archives at the Presidio where you have all the photography that was taken on the movies. So like this. There is another archive where they have all production documents. There's another archive which has all the concept art. Also, as well as Lucasfilm, I asked George Lucas if I could have access to his archives. So he has his own archives with clippings and his own production documents, and he said yes. So I got access to those. So I had 5 or 6 different archives that I had to visit. I was I was in America, in 1 year I was in America for 7 months, just researching. And at the end of those 7 months, because I was researching all 6 films, I said, there's too much. There's just too much. I can't. If I fit them all into a single book, 600-page book, there's going to be 80 to 100 pages on each movie, and there's just too much material. And so I said to Lucasfilm, look, if I separated them into 2 books, would that be a problem? And they said, as far as they were concerned, no problem at all. So I went to Los Angeles, because they're based up in San Francisco, Marin County. I then went down to Los Angeles the day after, and I met with Benedict Tash, and I said, Benedict, I think we've got enough material for 2 books. So what I did was, I took material, unpublished material from episodes 1, 2 and 3, and I basically concept artwork, and I said, I put it on a PowerPoint, and I just went through on my computer, just one after the other, and I said, Benedict, every single one of these would have to be deleted from the book, because we just wouldn't have space if we just do 1 book. But if we do 2 books, then we can include them all. And he said, okay. So that was it. So that from that moment on, everything I did, I concentrated on finishing the first book, and then did the second one. So the other aspect of this is the text, and you know from as per the previous books, I decided it has to be an oral history. So the other aspect of that is who's going to talk, and that's where the next part of my thinking went, because in all of this documentation, I've got interviews with John Williams, with Joe Johnson, Lorne Peterson, John Dykstra, everybody involved has done interviews on Star Wars, because Star Wars is so popular. But really, I have to find a way of making a book that's different from all the other books that have been made before. And for me, the only way of doing that was not only including documents that have never been published before, but to include George Lucas in it, and as much as possible to have the books, both books, from George Lucas's point of view. And so that became my next thing to do. So let's switch over to let's go into hyperdrive once again. Right. So it became how do I get George Lucas on board? Now luckily, because I'd spent 7 months or more by this stage, almost a year, at visiting the ranch, Skywalker Ranch, the people at Skywalker Ranch knew me, and I'm assuming they were happy with the things that I was doing, the things I said, and the way that I treated the materials. And so I asked, was George available for interview? And he said, luckily, he said yes. And so the first, when I went in to meet George, because the thing is, I want the books from George's point of view. I wanted them to reflect his ideas and his philosophy. I wanted to find out the why of things, why he had done things, and why he had made Star Wars, and what was his personal philosophy that told you that informed the movies. I wanted to find all that, and I wanted him on record. And so, first day, I go to the main house. Right, they said to be there at 10 a.m. So I'm there at 10 a.m. George is waiting at the door for me. Open the door, he's waiting for me. Very kindly, we go up to his office. We sit down, have drinks, and I can see his office. I can see toys, models, photos. In fact, funny enough, there's a photo by W. Eugene Smith of Charlie Chaplin on the set of Limelight, which I have in the Charlie Chaplin book, and he's got an original print on the wall. So George likes all the things, all the films. He loves Ingmar Bergman. He loves James Bond. In fact, Star Wars was originally, he described Star Wars at the beginning as like James Bond in outer space. It's like James Bond meets 2001 meets A Fistful of Dollars. So those were his reference points from the very beginning. So we sit down and George says, okay, I'm a real tough editor, so anything you write I'm going to read and I'm going to tear apart. And I said, fine, no problem, anything you want. It was absolutely fine by me. I want the book from your point of view. I want it to feel as though it's your book. And then he said, and I don't want Q&A. I don't want to ask on such and such a day, how did I feel? He didn't want those sort of questions. What he wanted was a conversation, right? So we had a conversation. So that meant anything that I prepared, any questions, I just put to the side. And what it meant is that we sat down and we started talking and we saw where the conversation led. So we would start on Star Wars. I would pick a subject. I remember the very first time I talked about Episode 1, I said, well, I was watching Episode 1 last night, and the word symbiosis came up twice in the movie. It's a strange word for a kids movie, because obviously he, as he's always said, he's made them for 12-year-olds. And that started the conversation, because all good writers put in clues to the work, to what their work is about in the work, and it'll be a phrase or an image or emotion, something about it that is like a key that will unlock and unpack the work. And this was the key to Episode 1. So it unlocked for George that avenue for him to talk about that, and that's how it started. Now, like any conversation, people will forget things, they will go dry, they'll say, I'm really hungry, we need to eat, and that's exactly it. Or they'll lose their thread. And that's exactly how it was with George. And it was great. It was just a really, really natural experience. So that's really what Star Wars is all about. It's all about symbiotic relationships. It's about, which we cover within Star Wars episodes 1 to 3. And then in episodes 4 to 6, it's really, that is about being selfish, characters being selfish and characters being selfless. And these are the themes over all 6 movies, and this is what George was explaining to me, as well as other stuff about how he edits and digital technology and everything else. So let's see, what else shall I mention? Okay, so the other aspect is obviously I had access to all the images. We're now an hour 20, so I'll be wrapping this up. So if you've got any questions, please ask them before I do wrap up. I want to talk a little bit about the text on the Star Wars books, because what essentially I had for the 6 movies over more than 1,000 pages meant that I had about 180 pages for each movie, which means that the granular detail I had to go into on each film was incredible. It's like doing a big book on every single film, but 6 of them all at the same time. So I needed help. Now, help came in the form of sub-editing. Again, if you've got interviews, they need to be cut down, edited and sorted, so they're into pre-production, production, post-production, and then within that, within each category, for filming in production, every single day. So if somebody is talking about Felucia, then all the quotes to do with Felucia, everybody who had anything to do with that scene, whether it's design or filming, would be grouped together. So I needed help. Colin Adele and Sean LeBlanc were the people who helped me the most on that, a few other people as well. So they would sort everything out for me and do timelines. The next thing is I needed help with the writing, and so I asked FX on episode 4 to 6 and Colin and Michelle on episodes 1 to 3 to do a first draft, a rough draft of the complete chronology of the making of the movies from beginning to end, including every single quote. So quotes that they think were good, keep in black. Any quotes that they thought, well, you could use as backup or not good, keep in red. Yep. So that I knew I could read through the whole thing and then edit and rewrite. Because then with the interviews I did with George, I did 6 days in total over a 2-year period. And also I did interviews with other people. George said, oh, you should meet John Knoll, you should meet Dennis Moran, you should meet Ryan Church or Eric Tiemans or Doug Chang, Mike Blanchard, etc. He would give me a list of people that I should meet, and so I would meet them and interview them as well. So all of those new materials I then loaded into these draft texts, and that's what I did, and then became the idea of crafting and shaping the story, because I had to find a story, a through story, with different themes all the way through, so that we have just the idea of the chronology of you doing what happens from day to day. You then have another story about the technology being used, because in episodes 4 to 6 and 1 to 3 there's advanced technology is being developed and used, and I had to explain that and show it, and so those are aspects. So I had to have all those different points layered in. And also I had George's philosophy. So George said, well, when you're making a story, if you introduce a lightsaber, you have to show the backstory of it, you have to show how it's used, you have to show its meaning. That's what happens in episode 4. So you see a lightsaber, but you don't really see it being used when Obi-Wan gives it to Luke. The next time you see a lightsaber, it's when Obi-Wan cuts off an arm in the cantina. So you understand then, second time, it's deadly. Not only it's deadly, it has to be used properly and quickly, swiftly. So then the next time you see it, when Luke is practicing, you understand how difficult it is to use and how far Luke has to go in order to weld that laser sword, as George calls it, as good as Obi-Wan. So in the same way, I had to layer and give the information to you, the reader, in order to tell the story of Star Wars. Okay, so I think that pretty much covers everything. So do you have any questions? We have no queries, we have no questions. So what I want to do is thank you for listening. So if you enjoyed this, then please like it, share it, please follow me on Twitter, on YouTube, on Facebook, and also below I will put in links to unboxings of all the unboxings I've done for these books. So thank you very much for listening to my first live stream. Hope you enjoyed it. Bye bye.